Number 1. Myeisha Brown was 16 years old when Metro Nashville police accused her of taking part in a killing that shook a quiet stretch of South Nashville. She was a local teen and student, and people who knew her described a complicated, contradictory public image. A young person who could be bright and expressive, but who was also drifting into trouble. In the years that followed, supporters would point to her writing her love of music and poetry, and her involvement with a community group called Epic Girl, while court records and news reports focused on the growing seriousness of the allegations against her. The man who died was Ruxin Wang, a 74-year-old grandfather visiting from China, retired from the Education Bureau there, and spending time with family in Tennessee. On a November afternoon, November 9, 2017, Wang stepped outside his son's home on Claiborne Street to handle a simple chore with the trash cans. Inside the house, a security camera captured ordinary family life, and then suddenly the sound of gunfire from outside. His son, Yun Wang, would later describe the moment as life splitting into a before and after. With his mother, frantic for help, and the family left trying to understand why an everyday task ended in tragedy. Investigators initially heard reports that several youths ran from the area, and the case carried the tense uncertainty that follows when witnesses are shaken and details are incomplete. Police ultimately focused on Brown. In early January 3, 2018, she was arrested, and as the case moved forward, the questions sharpened. Was this targeted, or was it a burst of violence that landed on the wrong person at the wrong moment? In court hearings, witnesses said they were with Brown when the shooting happened and claimed they saw her lift a gun even though they said they did not actually see her pull the trigger. Police also acknowledged gaps that made the case feel unsettling. In a different way, no gun was recovered, and reporting at the time noted the lack of forensic evidence tying her directly to the scene. That uncertainty didn't soften the stakes. In November of 2018, Brown was indicted, and the system chose to treat her as an adult, a decision that brought intense public attention, especially because the victim was an elderly visitor and because the accused was still a teenager. Then came another twist that fueled debate well beyond Nashville. Brown's bond was set at $100,000, and a public fundraising campaign raised enough money for her to make bond on February 1, 2019. To Wang's family, the fundraising felt like a second shock, an accusation turning into a cause while they were still grieving. Not long after her release, prosecutors pointed to continued legal problems, and a judge revoked her bond citing repeated offenses and violations while she awaited trial. Before a jury trial could force every detail into the open, Brown pleaded guilty to avoid trial. She received a 15-year sentence. In March 21, 2022, the Tennessee Department of Correction reported she was found dead in her cell at the Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center while serving that sentence. Number 2. Sharon Carr was 12 years old when she committed the crime that would make her one of the most notorious juvenile offenders in modern British history. A student living in Camberley, Surrey, Carr had a public image that could seem ordinary. At a glance, young talkative, sometimes looking for attention, but people around her also noticed volatility. She was born in Belize and moved to England as a child, growing up in serious poverty and instability. Her home life included upheaval and conflict, and school records and reporting from the time described a child who could shift from polite and helpful to disruptive and aggressive, with adults repeatedly trying to intervene through social services and brief foster placement. As Carr entered adolescence, the warning signs appeared to sharpen rather than fade. Accounts from the investigation and later court proceedings described escalating behavior problems, trouble with authority, and an unsettling fascination with harming others' thoughts that would later surface in diary-style writings and statements she shared while in custody. In court, her own words and writings were treated as important clues to her inner world, suggesting a desire for control, excitement, and recognition tied to violence rather than a single impulsive outburst. In the early hours of the 7th of June, 1992, 18-year-old Katie Ratcliffe, an apprentice hairdresser, was walking home from a night out in Camberley when she was attacked. Police later described it as an unprovoked assault on a stranger, with the scene also showing signs investigators interpreted as sexualized, which pushed early suspicions toward an adult male offender. Some of Katie's personal items were taken, and her body was later found near a cemetery area in Farnborough. With the wrong profile in mind, detectives struggled to identify a child as a potential suspect, and the case went cold. The break came 2 years later, on the 2nd anniversary of Katie's death, when Carr attacked a fellow student at Collingwood College. The victim survived, and the incident triggered Carr's arrest. While detained, she repeatedly boasted on calls to people around her, and in written entries about killing Katie, describing details that investigators believed were too specific to be coincidence. That flood of self-incriminating information prompted police to reopen the unsolved homicide with Carr at the center. Carr was ultimately tried at Winchester Crown Court and convicted of Katie Ratcliffe's murder in late March of 1997. The sentencing judge described the killing as having a sexual motive and emphasized the danger she posed. She received a life sentence and was detained at Her Majesty's pleasure with a minimum term set at 14 years. Yet her case did not follow the usual path toward release after that minimum was served. Later court records and reporting describe a long history of serious violence in secure settings, leading to restricted status and repeated concerns about ongoing risk. Carr remains incarcerated, and she has been held at HM Prison Bronzefield. Number 3. Carmen Collins was 17 years old when investigators in Houston County, Georgia said she killed her younger sister, India Collins. Carmen was a teenager living at home in Kathleen, in a household that seemed typical from the outside parents who ran errands, siblings sharing the same space, and a summer day that should have ended quietly. India, just 12 years old, was remembered as a strong student who had earned honor roll recognition at her school. But court testimony later suggested tension building beneath that normal surface. During Carmen's later hearing, her mother told the court Carmen had a pattern of running away and had been spending time with a troubling social circle in the Columbus area. It painted a picture of a teenager pulling away from home life, drifting into riskier choices, and becoming harder to reach. According to the account presented in court, the breaking point came on July 3, 2012. Carmen's parents had left the girls at home. While they were gone, prosecutors said Carmen began packing her things, appearing to prepare to leave again. India walked in and tried to stop her, and the argument turned into a moment where Carmen may have felt trapped, confronted, and desperate to regain control. What followed happened inside the family's home in the kind of familiar setting that should feel safest. Prosecutors said Carmen went into her parents' room, took her father's handgun, and shot India multiple times while chasing her through the house. Investigators and attorneys described it not as a random act against a stranger, but as a private family conflict that escalated too fast for anyone to step in and calm it down. Later that evening, emergency crews were dispatched to a house fire in Kathleen. Firefighters found India inside the home, and she was taken to a medical facility where she was pronounced dead. Detectives determined she had not died from the fire itself, and the case shifted from a suspected accident to a homicide investigation. At the scene, investigators also noticed a handgun and a vehicle were missing details that suggested someone had left in a hurry and may have been trying to complicate what had happened. As authorities traced those missing pieces, Carmen became the focus. Reports said information placed her in the Columbus area, and she was located driving her parents' car in the Bunker Hill neighborhood. Carmen was arrested on warrants for murder and first-degree arson, 2 days after the fire. For months, Carmen maintained a not guilty position, but the case eventually took a decisive turn. In late July of the following year, she pleaded guilty to malice murder and first-degree arson. Prosecutors said additional charges, including felony murder and a firearm charge, were dropped as part of the plea. Family impact was openly acknowledged in court, including her mother's statement that the sisters loved each other and that the family still loved Carmen. Carmen Collins was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years, and she received a concurrent 20-year sentence for arson. Number 4. Angel Bumpass was 13 years old, an 8th grade student in Chattanooga, Tennessee, when her name would eventually be tied to a killing that shook a quiet neighborhood. Nearly a decade later, she would be arrested as a young adult facing allegations so severe that they threatened to define her life. In the winter of 2009, Franklin Bonner, a 68-year-old man, was found dead inside his home on Enterprise Lane. Police believed the home had been ransacked during a robbery attempt, and the scene suggested the victim had been restrained with duct tape. With few clear leads, the case went cold, leaving Bonner's family with grief and unanswered questions. Years passed. Then in 2018, prosecutors reopened the investigation and focused on fingerprints recovered from the duct tape. Authorities said those prints matched Angel Bumpass pulling a teenager from the past into the center of a case that had haunted investigators for years. For Bumpass, the accusation arrived with a particular kind of shock, being asked as an adult to answer for something the state claimed she did as a child. The prosecution's theory was that Bumpass took part in a robbery that ended in Bonner's death, working with an older Keogh defendant, Mallory Vaughn. Prosecutors framed the motive as theft, while Bumpass denied any involvement and said she had no reason to harm Bonner. The defense argued the story didn't fit the realities of a 13-year-old's life and that the links were thin. They emphasized what the state could not firmly establish, a direct relationship between Bumpass and Bonner, or proof that Bumpass and Vaughn were truly connected at the time of the crime. In the fall of 2019, Bumpass, then 24 years old, went to trial alongside Vaughn. Vaughn was acquitted. Bumpass was convicted of first-degree murder and aggravated robbery, and she received a life sentence. The split verdict only deepened the controversy because the jury had heard the same overall narrative but reached very different outcomes for each defendant. Bumpass appealed and asked for a new trial. Hamilton County Criminal Court Judge Tom Greenholtz later granted that request, saying the cumulative effect of multiple errors and problems during the first trial warranted starting over and noting the state's limited ability to show meaningful connections among the people involved beyond the fingerprint evidence. In September of 2022, Bumpass was released from custody, while the case moved back toward another trial. In August of 2023, the case took a dramatic turn. Hamilton County District Attorney Cody Wamp moved to dismiss the charges, and Judge Amanda Dunn dismissed the case. Wamp said the state believed at least one responsible person remained unidentified, and that it was unlikely a 13-year-old girl could have carried out the crime alone. Bumpass had also undergone polygraph testing as part of discussions about the case, though such results are not admissible in court. Outside the courthouse, she thanked supporters and said she felt happy and blessed. As of the dismissal, Angel Bumpass was out of custody with the charges against her dropped, and she reported she was living in Kentucky with her 2 daughters while trying to rebuild her life. Number 5. Jenny Bunsome was 16 years old when her family's home in Denver's Montbello neighborhood became the center of a frantic search. She was Jordan Vong's aunt, living under the same roof as the 7-year-old boy. In public reporting, she's described simply as a juvenile at the time, a teenager in a family setting with no public job title attached to her name, but with the everyday responsibility of being older and in charge around a small child. On the afternoon of August 6, 2018, Jordan's family reported him missing after they couldn't find him inside the house. Officers searched rooms and closets, then widened their efforts as worry spread outside. Neighbors watched patrol cars come and go, and the story quickly became a community emergency. For hours, it looked like the kind of case everyone prays ends with a child found safe. By the next night, investigators returned with a search warrant for a more thorough sweep. That second search changed everything. Jordan was located inside the home intentionally concealed. The teenager who had been in the background of the missing child crisis was taken into custody, and prosecutors soon signaled they intended to treat the case with adult-level severity. In early court proceedings, the case drew attention to how unusual it is for someone that young to face charges that carry adult consequences, and how quickly a family tragedy can become a high-profile criminal investigation. Court documents and local reporting later traced the incident back to a moment that began with something small and familiar: a child asking to play video games. Investigators said Bunsome had been upset after an argument with her girlfriend when Jordan came into her basement bedroom and asked to play. She refused, and he didn't leave right away. In that tense, emotionally charged space, the situation escalated quickly. Police said she pushed him off the bed, and when he cried, she placed a hand over his mouth and blocked his nose. The reporting describes it as a brief struggle that ended with Jordan no longer moving. What happened next, investigators said, showed a shift from panic to concealment. Jordan's body was wrapped in a blanket and hidden inside a portable closet in the bedroom. While family members and officers searched the neighborhood, the answers were still inside the house. Reporting on the probable cause narrative also said Bunsome called her girlfriend and admitted what had happened, and that the girlfriend urged her to hide the body rather than call for help. Those details became part of the chilling evidence prosecutors pointed to, not only what investigators believed happened, but how the truth stayed buried while everyone else looked for a missing child. As the legal process unfolded, the case raised difficult questions about youth impulse and responsibility. Prosecutors filed charges that reflected both the seriousness of the death and the fact that Jordan was a child in a position of trust. Later reporting noted that the autopsy described neck and spinal compression along with blunt force injuries, reinforcing investigators' focus on a physical struggle rather than an outside intruder. In March of 2021, Bunsome, then 18, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and tampering with a body. And the original first-degree charge was dismissed. In late June of that same year, she was sentenced to 7 years in Colorado's youth offender system, with a 30-year suspended sentence in the Colorado Department of Corrections. Number 6. Kayla Dixon was 16 years old when her name entered the public record in Metro Atlanta, tied to a crime that began with something ordinary: an online listing for a video game console. She was a teenager from Doraville, Georgia, and by that point, she was also a young mother. To most people who saw her day to day, she blended into the background, another kid growing up too fast, trying to look steady while carrying adult responsibilities. Investigators later said the lead-up was not a sudden snap, but a choice that built in private. Text messages between Dixon and her boyfriend Nathaniel Vivian showed them discussing a robbery around a Craigslist meetup, including who would hold the gun they planned to bring. Police testimony described the couple using phones and computers to plan details, treating the idea like a scheme instead of a danger. There is no widely reported mental health explanation that accounts for what happened. What the record does show is planning and two young people willing to gamble with a stranger's safety for a quick payoff. On the night of September 12, 2014, Danny Zeitz, a Sandy Springs man known as a semi-professional gamer, arranged to sell a PlayStation 4 console through Craigslist. His girlfriend later said he was selling the system to help pay bills. Zeitz met Dixon and Vivian outside his apartment complex in Sandy Springs, expecting a straightforward exchange. He had no reason to believe he was walking into a planned confrontation. As Zeitz approached their car, Vivian, seated behind the wheel, grabbed the console without paying. Zeitz held on, refusing to let it go, and the moment tightened into a struggle at the driver's side window. From the passenger seat, Dixon pulled out a handgun and fired a single shot. Police said the bullet passed through Vivian's hand before striking Zeitz. Dixon's 16-month-old baby was in the back seat during the encounter, a detail that amplified the sense of chaos and risk in those few seconds. The couple drove away and went to a hospital for Vivian's injury. That choice, meant to solve an immediate problem, became the thread law enforcement could pull. Officers responding to a person down call found Zeitz in the apartment complex parking area. Detectives then built the case through both digital and physical evidence, including the messages prosecutors said showed planning and forensic work tying the firearm to the crime scene. The killing also rippled through the gaming community, and Zeitz's name stayed in the news, including reports that he became the subject of a documentary titled Level Up. In court, the case split in two. Vivian went to trial and was convicted, receiving a life sentence plus additional time. Dixon, although a juvenile at the time of the shooting, was prosecuted as an adult. By the time her case reached a courtroom trial date, she was 18 years old. In June of 2016, on the day her trial was scheduled to begin, she pleaded guilty. She apologized to Zeitz's family in court and expressed remorse. The judge sentenced Kayla Dixon to 40 years in prison under the plea agreement. Number 7. Tayiana Thomas was 14 years old when Toledo police were called to a home on the 1000 block of Woodland Avenue in Toledo, Ohio, on a Wednesday night in early December of 2016. She was a student still living inside the tight circle of school family rules and teenage moods. To people outside the house, there was no public warning sign that this family would become a headline. What neighbors and classmates saw was a kid like many others and a brother and sister growing up under the same roof. Inside that home, the tension was painfully familiar. Siblings clashing in the way siblings often do. Investigators later said it appeared the situation involved an argument that escalated. Those words sound distant and procedural, but the meaning is simple. A moment of anger grew into a moment no one could undo. In the hours and days that followed, the case became a debate not only about what happened, but about what her age should mean inside a courtroom built for adults. That night, the emergency call came in just before 9 p.m. Officers arrived and found Tiana's brother, Tommy Thomas, 15 years old, injured. He was transported to a nearby hospital where he later died. Police identified Tayiana as the suspect and arrested her. At her first court appearance, local reporting described a room heavy with emotion as she faced a murder charge and entered a denial plea. The public details were limited, but the emotional reality was not one child gone, another child in handcuffs, and a family suddenly split between grief and shock. As prosecutors prepared their case, they filed to have Tayiana certified to stand trial as an adult. The move reflected the seriousness of the charge, and it also highlighted a fear behind it that the juvenile system might not hold someone long enough or impose consequences strong enough for an offense this severe. Reporting on the certification process noted that her contact with the juvenile system began before this incident, including probation connected to a robbery case in 2015. Legal experts explained that judges weigh the seriousness of the allegation. The child's maturity, prior history, and whether available programs can realistically rehabilitate the teen while still protecting the public. By mid-June of 2017, prosecutors announced she would not be tried as an adult, keeping the case in the juvenile system despite earlier attempts to transfer it. Another local report stated that Tayiana told police she shot her brother after an argument, a detail that framed the event as intensely personal and immediate, rather than a crime against a stranger. Even so, the case did not become small because it stayed in juvenile court. The possibility of adult-level punishment still hovered over the proceedings, and the family's grief remained at the center of every hearing. Later reporting described Tayiana entering a guilty plea in 2017 under Ohio's Serious Youthful Offender Framework, which can combine juvenile placement with a suspended adult sentence. In the fall of 2019, coverage summarizing the outcome reported that an adult prison sentence was imposed 15 years to life. Tayiana Thomas is serving a sentence of 15 years to life in prison.